Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the launch of our new four-part series, The Future of Economic Support: Cash, Credits, and Family Prosperity. For years, we've debated whether cash works, but the evidence is clear. Now, I believe the question is different. How do we build on what we already know works and design policies that take us further? At the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality, we believe progress happens when policy is grounded in people's lives. People-centered policy means listening closely to families themselves, understanding how systems show up in their daily lives, and designing solutions that reflect reality. That's why I am so honored to kick off this series with someone who has helped reshape the national conversation around cash and who gets to shape policy. Aisha Nyandoro, founder and CEO of Springboard to Opportunities. Through her leadership of Magnolia's Mother's Trust, one of the longest running guaranteed income programs in the country, Aisha has not only delivered resources directly to families, but brought voices of Magnolia mothers into mainstream economic policy debates. So today, we're going to spend time learning more about that work, how it began, and what it has taught us, and how those lessons can help inform the next generation of economic policy. Aisha, we're grateful you're here and excited to learn from you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. So for our audience, please feel free to start thinking about questions you might want to ask Aisha. Please drop them in the Q&A box at any time. Okay, let's get started. But before we talk about policy design, I want to hear how the story of how Magnolia's Mother's Trust came to be. Can you give us a quick history?
Yeah, so I will first and foremost say thank you again for having me. Thank you to the entire audience for being here. I know webinars are still hard, especially after being in this space for so long now. And you asked for a quick history. I'll also name that brevity is not my strong suit, so I will try to give you as brief a history as possible as it relates to the evolution of Magnolia Mothers Trust. So I lead an organization, Springboard to Opportunities, that operates in Jackson, Mississippi. We pride ourselves on being radically resident driven. We work directly with families that live in federally subsidized affordable housing. And it is that radically resident driven aspect of our work in which Magnolia Mothers Trust came into fruition. In
Hmm.
2016, the organization had been operating for a few years, about 4 years, having an opportunity to meet the goals they had for themselves. And Magnolia Mothers Trust really began as a listening project, not as a policy experiment, not with this idea that we could, not as an economic development experiment either. It really
Hmm.
was sitting with families in their living rooms and on playgrounds and asking them what is that they need and to actually breathe, to actually actualize their goals they have for themselves and their families. And so with that, we realized that families just needed more cash. It wasn't, they didn't ask for a guaranteed income at the time. I didn't even have the language of guaranteed income to ask them what was it that they needed, but they just simply talked about needing space to think about the future, space to dream. And so with that, we said, okay, how do we meet you where you dream? What does that look like? And from there, we launched the Magnolia Mothers Trust in 2017. And so that is really the brief history of how this entity, this innovation, this love letter has come into being.
Well, I think you did a great job being short, and it was like all very useful hearing the story. And I think what really draws me to this story is also where you are at. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Pensacola, Florida. I jokingly refer to it as LA, Lower Alabama. I know that you're based in Jackson, Mississippi, which isn't too far. You describe yourself as the granddaughter of the civil rights movement. Uh, I love, and you also talk about how there's no better place than in the South to have these conversations. So, as you were listening and learning, can you tell me what did you learn early on about who holds power and who doesn't that influenced how you designed this program?
Yeah, so thank you for that. You're right. I do think that the proximity that I have to community and place and the love that is the South that weaves every identity of not only who I am personally, but of my work is definitely situated in that. So when I think about who holds power, because of the reality that I am a granddaughter of the civil rights movement and I am a daughter of the South, I believe that people hold power.
Hmm.
And recognizing that people hold power, I understand that solutions for change have to come from community. You don't do anything in isolation. You don't design a program. You do not create a new policy. Everything that we do has to be led by people and has to be led by community. So my being in the South definitely colors that lens of how I approach my work.
I again, I just really have such an affinity of how you got there and how you really listened to mothers. I started out working here in DC in federal policy, and I worked for Congresswoman Judy Chu, and we were trying to draft legislation. And one of the things that I um, thought was odd at the time because I was a young staffer is that she was like, nope, you're going back to my district and we're going to talk to all the people on the ground and see what they think. And I thought, that's not how it
Mm.
works. But in actuality, it is. It's how it should work. And so I just love hearing stories like that. I like being constantly reminded that this is where policy should start, certainly from the ground up.
But and
Um,
I love thank you for say
yeah,
thank you for lifting that up because you said that's not how it work. And I want to note that we make it seem so simple, just being in
yeah,
community. Being in
yeah.
community is very difficult. I mean, it's hard because in order to be in community, you have to have relationship. And having
Mm-hmm,
relationships mean that you have to do the work of
mm-hmm,
showing up, of being present, of being authentic, of trusting and listening, of being willing to put aside your assumptions and actually do the hard work of listening. And so many of us don't want to do that. And not only do so many of us want to do that, so much of mainstream society doesn't feel that that is the work. So we are
yeah,
constantly being pushed to move faster. And
right,
when you are truly operating in community, you cannot move fast. We
right.
dreamed about the Magnolia Mothers Trust for over a year before it came into fruition because we really wanted to make sure that when we came out with the initiative, that it truly would represent what our community said it was that they needed, and they would be proud of it, and it would be a representation of their true lives and their lived experiences and what was necessary to move not only their lives forward, what was needed to move the narrative forward, what was needed to move policy forward, what was necessary to change conditions for not just a few, but for all of us.
Yeah. I think that's so powerful. I think one of the best moments of my career was when we were doing this work around education, and a high school principal told the congresswoman, "This is the first time I've ever participated in one of these things," and people actually came back to us and
Mm.
like showed that they listened to us. And I think I really learned then there is such that need for the listening, the back and forth, and to keep people involved, and it will. That's how we build movement. So thank you for that. Um, I'd like to move on to talk a little bit more about some of the programs that sometimes work here in DC and where we're trying to make progress. Uh, whether you're in DC or in Jackson, Mississippi, I think there is a constant conversation about how unaffordable things are. Families are navigating unaffordable housing, childcare, food, gas prices. From what you've seen, how has guaranteed income helped families meet the cost of living while also building towards a brighter future?
Yeah, question because I'm like, just think about if you are given additional cash, how would that help you
Yeah.
in not only meeting your immediate needs, but also helping you address the needs of your future? And I think that that's the space that we try. I think that's one of the spaces that we don't operate in well. We act as if individuals experiencing poverty are experiencing anything else than that's different than the most of us. And the reality is that they're not.
Hmm.
The moms that I work with, the Magnolia Mothers Trust, are facing exactly what everyone else is facing across this country right now. rising rent, childcare costs that they can't afford, groceries that make no sense. I bought a gallon of ice cream the other day for my kids. It cost $10.
Oh my gosh,
$10.
yes, yes.
Exactly. $10 for a gallon of ice cream. And so guaranteed income doesn't solve every structural problem, but it gives families the breathing room to stay housed, to keep the lights on, and to avoid the cascading crises that set them back for years. But also what guaranteed income does, and I say this all the time, the least sexy part about our work is the guaranteed income. The
Hmm.
sexy part is what it allows it to unlock. Guaranteed income allows you to no longer have to operate in survival mode. So you
Right.
actually get to operate in that luminal space, a possibility. You get to
Hmm.
actually dream. And that's the part where people get to begin making future oriented choices. They get to pay down debt. They get to go back to school. They get to think about what is it that I want to be when I grow up, not just what it is that I want for my kids. What do I actually want for myself? And so that's the bridge from surviving to planning, and from planning to building real economic liberation, which then allows them thriving, which is the goal always of this work.
Sure. And I love I love what you said about the ability to plan for the future. I think that that isn't often the goal when it comes to federal policy. And a narrative that I try to tell policymakers is really just how multidimensional poverty is. And it's amazing how as simple as cash can help address those different dimensions because every month it could be something different, right? And that is what is to me so magical about this policy. Um, so we do know policymakers are more comfortable talking about cash when it's delivered through tools like the child tax credit or the earned income tax credit, programs that millions of families already rely on. From your perspective, what do these policies teach us about how direct cash supports can work at scale?
You know, I think both of these tools have already taught us really powerful lessons about what's possible. These credits quietly lift millions of families out of poverty every year. And when the expanded child tax credit was in place, we saw child poverty drop by a record amount. We
Mhm.
saw child poverty cut in half just from the child tax credit. We were on a precipice of eradicating poverty when trying to make it a permanent program, but unfortunately, Congress could not meet us where we were dreaming at the time, and we could not get there, which was the real
Mhm.
tragedy. And I think a lot of us went into mourning. I know I did regarding that.
Yes. Yes.
But we see cash policies like the EITC and the CTC that families use cash in remarkable, consistent ways to cover essentials, to smooth income volatility, and to invest in their children. So it's not as if we need more data. We have
Right.
all of the data points. What it is that we need communal will. We need to actually shift our value proposition and shift the narrative on deservedness. It's really not, it's not that we're lacking data anymore. It's that we're lacking
Yes.
will. We still have these dated narratives of deservedness about who is entitled to live a good life, who is entitled the ability to dream and plan for their future. And until we are willing to get really honest about some of those ideologies that we still hold on to, we will continue to have the same outcomes that we have. And I I understand that, all of this shifting of narratives connects to values. And that really is the long arc of the work. I will say when we
Right.
started this work several years ago, I was very naive. I was like, we just need a proof of concept. Once we prove it, like the field of dreams, once you build it, they will come. I was like, once
Hmm.
we prove it, everyone will lock arms with us and we will be able to get this done. But what I have come to recognize is that policy moves at the speed of narrative, and narrative is intricately wedded to values. So, how do we shift values and how do we shift perceptions? And how do we get to the place where we recognize that that's all of our work to
Yeah.
interrogate what it is that we believe, not just a subset of us, not just advocates, not just recipients. It's all of us to really recognize that we all do better when we all do better. And what is the social contract that we all feel that we should benefit from?
Right. Well, I think this narrative has such an opportunity now, unfortunately, because of the way We are seeing our economy shape up. There's a lot of talk recently about the K-shaped economy, growing inequality. And so I think absolutely there it is more about all of us than it is about us versus them. So I think if you could pick maybe one um, under misunderstanding that you feel like people have to change the narrative, what would that be?
I think one misunderstanding that we have about cash is that we tell ourselves a lie that we do not have an economy in which we already provide cash-based subsidies.
Yeah.
We do. At
Yes.
full scale, we go about making sure that individuals who are wealthy have significant tax breaks. And why can we not flip the script on that and do that for the other 99%? And
Mhm.
so I think that's the biggest narrative shift. We tell ourselves that, oh, we can't do that as a society. We are not a society that gives subsidies or cash or any of these other benefits. And we actually do. And so we have to first wrestle with that. And the other narratives that, I hear I actually will not get into because I don't want to
Yeah,
perpetuate those.
right.
I do think that the narrative that I would like to lift up, though, is one that I want us all to begin to think about. Think about when you were young on Christmas and you got that lovely Christmas money, how you were able to think. So I remember when I was younger, I had an uncle, my Uncle Chip. He would always give cash.
Yeah.
That was his thing.
Yeah.
And I loved it so much because I knew Uncle Chip was going to cut me off a beautiful $100 bill and I could do whatever I wanted to with that money. And just the anticipation of knowing that I was getting it, number one. And then number two, the excitement of thinking through all of the ways in which I was not only going to spend that money, but that I was going to grow that money. What
Yeah.
people won't do X, Y, Z. What if we put ourselves in that situation with the excitement of thinking about what we did and the excitement around that? And I think that
I think on my end, the internet is a little slow, so I'm just going to give it a second to catch up.
okay, because I am here and I can hear you.
Okay. All right. I think we've, caught up to 2026 now. Again, I'm here. So I, I'm kind of bummed I missed the Uncle Chip's the story, the last half of it, because I also have an uncle who did something very similar, and I like was like waiting to hear that. But I think that might have just been on my end. But we'll catch up on that next time.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I'd like to move on and talk about centering of women of color, which I think is just a huge part of my work and your work. At GCPI, like many of us, we believe prioritizing women of color isn't just a slogan, it's a sound strategy.
Mhm.
Your work has helped elevate the voices and leadership of Magnolia Mothers in a national conversation about economic policy. Tell us what it takes to bring community voices, especially those that are often overlooked, into policy conversations in meaningful ways.
Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much. So, first, you have to love community and respect community. That's first and foremost.
Yeah.
It starts with the humility to recognize that lived experience is a form of expertise and to treat that expertise with respect. It, as Springboard and Magnolia Mothers Trust, that has meant that we build our programs around our residents and their needs as they explain them to us, not as they dictate, as not as we dictate to them. And that is preparing them before they walk into a panel, a meeting with policymakers, making sure they're not just sharing trauma, but finding joy in seeing how much power they have.
Yeah.
It means being inclusive. It also requires changing who is in the room and who speaks first, recognizing those power dynamics exist. We work to create spaces where moms are not an add-on at the end of a panel, but centered in the conversation, and where policymakers and researchers see themselves as accountable to those voices, not the other way around. Making sure that the women that we work with are seen and visible in this work. I really feel it's probably the most joyful aspect of what it is that I do. It is always my responsibility to make sure that they are not erased from the conversation. I tell people all the time that the innovation that is the Magnolia Mothers Trust is not mine. There were 20
Yeah.
courageous women in 2018 who were the first recipients that came alongside us and said, okay, when I invited them to come dream with me when we were thinking about what this was, these women sat around a conference room table with me and just had lunch. And so it started from there. And we are constantly making sure that we honor their voices. But not only do we honor their voices, we invest in their leadership, we invest in their wisdom, and we are making sure that our partners are coming alongside us in honoring their wisdom and those investments as well.
I love that attention to detail that you had about the order of speaking, because I can't tell you how many press conferences I've been at where the lived experience, the real person is last, right? And by then they've heard like a dozen speakers sometimes, right? And it it hits differently whether or not you're hearing the story at the beginning or at the end. And I think that is a small moment like that is really powerful, I think, when you are talking about the reach.
Yeah, but not only does it hit differently for those individuals who are listening, think about how it hits differently for the individual sharing. So
Right.
when you recognize that, oh, I am the person in the room that holds the wisdom and that they are here to listen to. It changes how you show up. You take up more space, you pull back your shoulders, and you begin to step into your power. And that's how policies shift. Perfect example of this a couple of months, and I'm going to flex for a second, take some privilege with that.
Of
A couple of
course.
months ago, we had former VP Harris was in town and she visited some of our communities. And she went grocery shopping with one of our moms, Javonica. And it was just her and Javonica that went shopping. It wasn't me, it wasn't other team members. It was a one-on-one with her and the VP. And I saw Javonica a couple of days later, and I was like, Javonica, how are you doing? Are you still in the clouds? She's like, oh, Miss Aisha, I live in the clouds now. She was, she's like, I live in the clouds now.
I love it.
She was like, the VP was listening to me. And she said, the VP told my story that night on stage. She was like, I now recognize that everything that I have been going through, it's not for anything. And it's not that people don't care, people just don't know. And it's now my responsibility that I make sure they know what it means to be a single Black mother in Jackson, Mississippi. And I was like, girl, that's what I'm talking about. You better own your power. And
Oh my
so,
gosh.
exactly. So she's a totally different person. Every time I see her, she have her hair done, her makeup done, her suits on. I'm like, ma'am, you better show up. And so it changes that person as well.
Wow. That's gonna sit with me for a long time, and just another great example of how you can just change the trajectory of not just one person, but she's gonna have an impact on many other people. She's gonna share that story. What a wonderful moment.
She's going to share that story forever. That is now going to be a story that her grandkids share. And I know
Yes.
that to be true because my grandmother met Jimmy Carter, and that is still a story that I share. And that picture is on my on my office desk because and I tell people all the time, like I always knew anything was possible because my grandmother, born a sharecropper, met President Jimmy Carter. If my grandmother could meet Jimmy Carter, I definitely could meet a president. So it changes the trajectory of what you know is possible for your life.
Right. And I think for, all of this is again leading up to a moment where policymakers see the interactions with people as not just a checkbox, but actually
Mhm.
the place where we start to think about how to start this policy, and I think again, coming from my experiences, like you find the real person, but then they're put last. And so just seeing what Vice President Harris did really, I think, communicates a lot about what kind of leader she is. So that's an amazing story. Um, okay, let me get back to my questions. Um, so you have seen the conversation around cash evolve over the last decade or more. What changes have you seen in how policymakers and the public talk about them?
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's come full circle.
Hmm.
So Yeah, a decade ago, no one was even talking about cash. So let's just
Yeah.
say that. It was a
Hmm.
few of us in a room whispering to each other about whether or not this was a possibility. And so it was really fringe. And now we have leaders at every level of government talking about it seriously as a policy tool. The conversation has shifted from does cash work, as we said, as you said earlier,
Yeah.
to how do we go about designing cash policies that are equitable, sustainable, and politically doable. So that's a shift in of itself. I've also seen, and I'll take some credit here for how we have seen the conversation and the narrative shift away from blaming individuals from families, away from blaming individuals and families toward naming the structural barriers that are in place as it relates to race, wages, racist policies, in our history in the care crisis. That doesn't mean the work is finished. We have a long way to go. We still do not have federal policy or state policy in a lot of instances, but it means that we are on the right track. And it means that we have to continue to do the hard work necessary. And as you said earlier, I think that we are at an inflection point, especially now that conversations around affordability have entered the room. How do we continue to talk about cash and the importance of cash as this country is coming up against an affordability crisis that is going to impact all of us at every
Yes.
level, whether we recognize it or not?
Yeah. Um, that is amazing. And I think it's happened relatively fast. If you look at how
I don't
long.
think it's fast.
Well, I think about, I've been on the paid leave um bandwagon for, 10 years working on it formally, but like it's been over 30 since FMLA. So, I think about that and when we looked at the trajectory of like healthcare, I think this it's meant to be a compliment. I think like the
No,
I
you're
think that it
right.
has moved pretty quickly, right? And
No,
so I think it's a sign of its of just how popular it will be and can be and its trajectory. So
no, you're right. I am woefully, what is the, I have this sense of urgency with all things. And so the fact that we're a decade and I'm like, what is the problem? Let's go, go, go.
yeah,
But I remember having a conversation with Angela Glover Blackwell one time, and she was like, Aisha, it took us over 20 years to get free lunch in school. And I'm like, oh gosh, I didn't know I was in for a decades long fight. I just wanted to do my decade and retire. I'm
yeah.
like, all right, let me change my perspective here.
It's too long. We can agree like that. We can agree on that, right? It is too long. Um, but again, maybe this is the last question, so we have time for others to ask questions
Okay.
on the call. Um, If we want a future where life is affordable, where families have real economic mobility pathways, and where every child and caregiver feels security, this is kind of a big question, so feel free to answer it however you'd like. What do we need to build now? What coalitions, what institutions, what narratives, what state level
Yeah.
precision? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we need a lot of pieces. So I'm going to try to cover all of those. We need a policy architect that treats economic security as a right, not a
Hmm.
reward. We need robust guaranteed income, a permanent, fully fundable, refundable child tax credit. We need affordable housing. We need universal child care and wages that actually match the cost of living. That's the floor family should be able to count on, not the ceiling. To get there, of course, we need the coalitions that across issues and sectors, anti-poverty advocates, labor, immigrant justice groups, disability justice leaders, and child advocates aligning against across a shared vision for cash, care, and racial equity. We also need institutions from state agencies to philanthropy that are willing to lock in. You see how I enunciated? I want to make sure
Yes.
that they get it.
Yes.
Philanthropy, I am calling you in with love,
Hmm.
that are willing to lock arms with us with this work to recognize that, as you said, this is decades long work. This is not a 2 to 3 year vision that we're trying to execute here. This is our moonshot and this is our moment. And so, how do we make that case, for long term? we narratively we need to tell a different story about who is deserving in this country. That means centering Black women, single moms, and caregivers not as symbols of need, but as protagonists in building policy solutions. And we also need to recognize that it is not just their responsibility to carry those stories. It is our responsibility to be in partnership with them, carrying those stories as well. And we need to use the data and the stories together to make the case for meaning lasting change.
Yeah. Uh, I feel like man, you had that ready. That's great. And I love that. Because it was a big question. And I think certainly, with my tank hat on, I think we need to have all of those things because that's how we actually make progress. Because
Right.
again, this work, people lead multidimensional, very complex lives, and there is no silver bullet to this inequality issue. Sometimes folks, I think, are looking for these like really simple answers. So we do need it all. And I'm so glad that you said it.
And we
Um,
deserve it all. We
we
all
deserve it
deserve
all.
it
I
all.
love that.
This is it is not a space of scarcity. We are not shrinking. We are not going to tell ourselves the lie that we cannot afford it. We all deserve it.
Right. Yes, poverty is a policy choice.
That's
So,
right.
right. Okay, so I have to, and as an only child, I must learn how to share now, even though I have more questions I'd like to ask you. Our team has been collecting questions throughout the conversation. And so if you haven't already, please drop more questions in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time we have left. So let me check this out. So our first question is from Stephanie Scott.
Hi,
From
Stephanie Scott.
Yes, she's a really brilliant cash researcher. Um, from your experience, what has actually been most effective in shifting narratives about people experiencing poverty, from deficit-based assumptions to trust-based framing in the guaranteed income space?
Oh my God, I love that question. Thank
I
you.
know it's
So
great.
I am going to tell you a story, Stephanie, if you don't mind. I like to tell stories. I realized a couple of years ago, I think I may be a storyteller, y'all. But anyway, so I always get the deficit question, or the when people are talking about guaranteed income and just giving people money, people always are like, oh, well, what are they going to do with the money? Did it or whatever. I hate that question.
Hmm.
And I always push back, and I have a very simple question. If you want to talk about whether or not people need money, I say, how much does milk cost? And people always look at me and like, how much does milk cost? And I'm like, how much does milk cost? And they're like, I don't know. I don't know how much milk costs. And I always say that the women that I work with can tell you how much milk costs at three different stores.
Yes.
It's not as if they're irresponsible with their resources. They just need more resources. And it gives people an inflection point where they can actually be like, huh, I've never thought about that. And okay, let me begin to see the other side of this and begin to interrogate my assumptions about why I even have these ideas around trusting individuals with cash and those pieces. So for me, the most helpful in shifting that narrative has just been asking a very simple question around a basic or something that most of us have in our refrigerator, a gallon of milk, and how much did it cost?
Right. Thank you for that. It's hard, and I will say it is hard it's sometimes hard to grow out of that habit. I sometimes shop at multiple grocery stores because I do know the eggs are cheaper here, even though I
Hmm.
just was at this other grocery store. So, that's the stuff that people grow up with, and it's hard to break that habit. Um, so, our next question is from Rodney, Alam. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name. Do you have a guide for starting up a cash payment program?
So we're saying cash payment or guaranteed income. And so that's the first thing. So
Mm-hmm.
wanting to make sure that we're level setting or what it is that we're talking about. Are we talking
Mm-hmm.
about emergency cash assistance? We're talking about guaranteed income. There are a significant number of guides out there and resources. I am the co-chair and the co-founder of the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, which is a think tank of researchers, practitioners, policymakers who come together to really interrogate what is necessary right now for the cash movement, as well as to learn from each other. So if you Google Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, you'll find a website, and there are a plethora resources there that can help you really think about starting your cash-based assistance program or your guaranteed income program.
That's great. I don't see a follow-up right now, but I think that was the perfect answer to that
Okay.
question. Um, all right, we have another question from somebody who didn't put in their name, but from what you've seen, how can guaranteed income work with public benefits so families don't lose support and end up worse off?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So when we first started this work in 2000, one of the biggest questions, how do we do without harm? Um, and the amount of work that has been done counted to policy and all when I benefits receive a guarantee income.
Aisha, I think your
All
connection
right,
seems
you
unstable.
look like you're like,
I'm going to wait a
I
minute just
keep
so it can catch up. Oh no. Okay. Well, I think her we might have lost Aisha for a couple minutes. Oh, here she is. Thanks everyone for your patience. I know where Aisha's coming back online here in just a minute. I know I couldn't catch some of that question, and I was eager to hear her answer too. So we'll just see if she can repeat the last part of that.
apologize. Yeah, apologies. I am sorry, y'all. I'm here. Urban Wi-Fi is not what I needed to do today.
No problem. I think I'm sorry to ask, but if I'm going to repeat the question, and then if you wouldn't mind summarizing your answer, we got a lot of feedback from folks that they were very interested in your answer to this. So, um, oh, where is it? So, yeah, from what you've seen, how can guaranteed income work with public benefits so families don't lose support and end up worse off?
All right, I have joined from a different connection point. Apologies. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
yes, we can hear you. We can hear
Okay.
you.
Yeah, apologies, y'all. Urban building and urban Wi-Fi and
Yeah.
building minions. So yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
here.
Thank you. And I will say everybody was very, I got a lot of notes in the chat about really wanting to hear this answer. And I think a lot of folks couldn't hear your answer to that question. So could we just repeat that, do a quick do-over if you
What
don't
was the
mind?
question again? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
from what you've seen, how can guaranteed income work with public benefits so families
Got
don't lose support and end up worse off?
it. Yep. Okay. Uh, 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 serious piece about what they're being, and I see my
Again, thanks everyone for your patience.
I can see.
I think we lost you again, Aisha. So, um,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm here. So sorry that you can't hear or see me.
it's okay. It's okay. There are a few other questions, and I'm trying to. Let's try one more, and if it doesn't work, then maybe we'll just have to get together again one day, and then have folks ask questions, and then we can um maybe one day do it in person. So like I know we're both on a schedule, so I don't want to have you repeat if like sometimes the internet just doesn't work. So we'll try one more and then see. If not, then we'll figure out a next step.
Yeah, apologies, y'all.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, we're living in these times where we are dependent on things like the internet, and there's nothing we can do to make it work. So, yeah. So are there conversations happening around proposing a universalized implementation for programs? There's a growing body of research indicating that by doing so, it lowers stigma and resistance and lowers admin burden. And that's from Kayla Bostick.
Thank you for that question, Kayla. Unfortunately, where we are with our federal government, there are not a lot of conversations happening around universality right now. The conversations that we're currently having are how do we make sure that we prevent the floor from falling any lower? How do we protect the benefits that we have already been put in place? And how do we fortify communities to make sure that they can withstand the harm that is coming down the pipelines?
Thank you. Well, I know we're at time, but I do want to wrap up and say thank you so much, Aisha, um, for your powerful stories, your insights, and your commitment to ensuring that families and women of color shape the policies that affect their lives. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for the launch of this series. The future we build depends on all of us. And we hope that you'll join us for the next conversation in this series as we continue asking not whether cash works, but how we design systems that deliver security and opportunity, allowing all families to thrive. We'll share a recording of this conversation on our website, so be on the lookout for that. And please share it with any colleagues who couldn't join us today. Our next webinar will be on April 22nd, where I'll be in conversation with Margot Crandall-Hollick from the Brookings Tax Policy Center. So thank you all again and have a wonderful day.